say that there's no biological law that says we have to age, which is a pretty radical statement. Break that down for us a bit.
We tend to think that what we see is inevitable, and it used to be the case for the speed of humans on the planet. We used to think that horseback was the fastest humans could go. We used to think that when you got an infection from a splinter that went gangrenous, that was the end of that limb or death. We used to think that childbirth was always going to be potentially lethal. These things we used to think were inevitable. Now we're in a world where I'm trying to let the world know that aging is no longer inevitable. I'm a biologist, I'm a geneticist at Harvard, where I've been studying this for close to 30 years now. And there's been no evidence from my lab or any lab around the world that has found evidence of any mechanism that tells us that we must age. There are processes that we've identified that happen over time, but we found that those are highly malleable. We can slow them down, and even in the last few years, almost completely reset the system and reverse aging. And so I challenge anyone to correct me when I say that aging is not inevitable, and also that there is a limit to human lifespan. Where's the evidence for that? There are plenty of species that live a lot longer than we do, and genetically they're not that different from us.
And with the technology that we have today, like let's say we stop developing technology today, what do you think the upper limit is of how long people can live?
Well, with today's technology, if you have the means, I actually think we're pretty close to being able to prevent most cancers and heart disease and diabetes. So those major killers are already largely preventable. And I'm including things like DNA tests for cancer and MRI scans. So
Yep.
not everyone can afford those yet, but shortly they hopefully will be able to. So if we stop technology right now, I think that with a good diet and that knowledge and lifestyle, the average person could probably make it to 95. There are plenty of people who don't have the knowledge or the means to do the right thing, and that's one of the things that I'm doing is education. But I think that we're about to completely blow past human longevity expectations and history of longevity. So right now, people who don't look after themselves bring the average down. There's COVID, there's drug addiction. That brings the average down across the planet, especially in the US. And so the average is almost 80 years old here. But those people who look after their bodies from an early age and do the right things and live long enough to be able to reap the benefits of today's technology, not even the future ones, can expect to live into their 90s. My father looked after himself late in life, and he's now 84 and as healthy as he's ever been in his whole life. So this is what people can expect now, even with today's knowledge and technology.
And where do you think, like, you said we're kind of like at the point we're hitting some of these breakthroughs. What are the big breakthroughs that have to happen to go from, let's say, people living into their 90s to people living into their 150s?
Well, they're happening in real time, actually. Every week there's another breakthrough in aging research. It was a slow field when I started in yeast cells. We were excited to make a yeast cell live 30% longer. That's 1995 technology. Things are happening at a rapid pace. We've got the discovery that there's a backup copy of youth in every cell in the body that can be tapped into. We're curing my lab and companies that I've started and others that are competing with mine, or at least friendly competition, are showing that it's not that difficult to reverse the age of an animal. We've done this in mice many times now. It's not that difficult. A high school student could do it with the knowledge that we have now. We're at the point where we're awaiting, next week we'll announce results in monkeys for age reversal. We're curing blindness using this technology out of my lab. So we I would say that the Wright brothers are flying already. Do we have commercial air flight? Do we have a Concorde yet? No, but we know it's possible to fly. So it's really not a question of if anymore. It's just a question of when these technologies become widely available. So what has to happen? We need to figure out a safe way to reprogram tissues in the body and eventually the whole body. We already have done some clinical trials in my companies. We have positive human data that shows that we can slow down and reverse some aspects of aging. biochemistry in the body can be reversed, such as cholesterol levels, blood pressure. These are all doable with today's technology out of my lab. There's a new technology which is even better than that, which is a little bit behind that. We haven't gone into humans, but we are in monkeys, as I mentioned, and that in the next 2 years we'll treat our first patient. It'll be to cure blindness, and so the answer really is that I think we've already made a lot of the breakthroughs that can extend human lifespan by decades. Getting to 150, I don't think those breakthroughs are that far away, given how fast the field is going right now. The investment in the billions of dollars into not just labs, but in particular industry that has burgeoned just since our paper in 2020, showing that safe age reversal is possible.
So I'm 49 and let's say relatively healthy. Like what's a prediction, and have some money I can spend on some of these things. What's a prediction for the average person like me? Like how long is somebody like me going to live, do you think?
Yeah, I think you need to throw away any preconceived ideas by looking at your parents and certainly your grandparents. We are going to live very different lives. We're actually approaching a big inflection point for those who are alive when these technologies come on board in the next decade. So the point is, if you're young, but some people who are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, you got to stick around. Do your best to live as healthy as possible. Seek the best medical care. Get scanned if you want to detect cancer. Invest in your health is the point. You can invest in coffee every morning from a certain store down the road, or you can invest that same money and afford an MRI scan for cancer. So stay alive. For yourself at your age, things are going to happen rapidly. By the time you're my age, I'm now almost 54, the technology hopefully will be here that you can be prescribed a medicine to not just slow down aging, but reverse parts of your body for age, eyes, ears, probably other parts of the body. And certainly within our lifetimes, we're going to see a dramatic change, not just in what we can do to the body, which I believe is going to be reset multiple times, but the approach of medicine. The approach right now of medicine and doctors around the world typically is, well, come see me when you get old and sick, and then I'll treat you.
Yeah.
Well, that's waiting till the end stages of aging cause problems. We call them diseases, but they're really the manifestations of this process called aging, which we now understand is a universal process across the body, and the same process in different tissues that we call Alzheimer's and diabetes and heart disease. These are all the end products of this same process of information loss in the body, which we call aging. And those diseases are currently tackled at the end of life. We need to tackle them early, and doctors will have the attitude, and it's happening right now, thanks in part to people who've read my book and the wave of longevity science. They're looking at patients now, some of the leading doctors, and saying, we can treat aging itself. We can start early. We could take someone in their 40s and use today's knowledge technology to prevent that process, or at least prevent it for another decade or two. And when you do that, then what happens is you stay healthier for much longer. And that's going to be a big shift as well. It's not just technology, it's the approach of medicine as well.
You mentioned these like things like getting MRI scans and some of these other kind of like tests to do early detection on things. And I recently got a MRI scan, which I thought was very, very helpful, full body MRI scan. But I can imagine for certain people, there's going to be a lot of false positives with these things. And there's going to be other types of things to get people to worry. And the stress of some of these early detections may not outweigh like knowing about it. Like, how do you think about that? Or is it like, hey, okay, if you happen to be a more neurotic person, you have to work on that first? Or how do you think about when you're advising friends to do these things?
Yeah, I think that's a big mistake, and I've heard a lot of people say that, and particularly doctors. I think that's misguided for the following reason. There are plenty of tests that we do on pregnant women, for children, looking at the risk of, say, having a child with Down syndrome.
Yep.
It's not proof, but it's evidence that we might want to follow up. And same truth is true for these MRI scans. Someone who's young, like the two of us, I regard us as relatively young, we want to get a baseline reading of what do we look like now, and then compare that every year and see what changes. It's the changes that are important. You don't go in necessarily
Yeah,
and have
so
a scan
basically you
and
want to see
say,
like the deltas every year, every 2 years or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it's no longer just a doctor looking, comparing before and after. There's AI systems already commercially available that allow a machine to say, oh, that part of your body just changed in the last year. Let's take a look at that, or monitor it a little more closely. Maybe you want to come in for a scan every 6 months to keep an eye on that. It's not all about, oh, waiting till you see a tumor. It's about knowing how your body's changing and getting ahead of that. And it's not just cancer that you see with these scans. You're looking at changes in your prostate size, your gut health, your bone health, your brain health, your blood vessels. All of these things are important to monitor changes of and get ahead of it before it actually becomes a disease.
Now, I'm having Brian Johnson on the podcast soon. He's trying to spend a couple $1 million a year to reduce his biological age. You're an avid tracker of your own biomarkers. Do you have like an official kind of figure for your own biological age? And how does one even like determine that?
Well, there are lots of ways. A very simple one is if you cross your legs and sit on the floor, how easy is it for you to stand up without touching the floor? If you can do
Yep.
that, you're doing well. Someone middle aged typically has to push themselves off with one hand, and if you're in your 80s, you might need to get onto one knee. That's easy, but that's not very accurate. The real data comes from blood tests or cheek swabs. What I've been doing for now a dozen years is monitoring my blood work. I don't do it that often. I'm not like Brian, where I'm doing lots of different tests and taking lots of supplements. But I do believe that without measuring anything, you're flying blind, like driving a car without a dashboard. And nobody would do that who's sane. And so take some blood tests. There are some ways to do that. You can ask your doctor or go to some of the commercially available tracking sites. I've been an investor and an advisor to Inside Tracker for many years. And they've been looking at my blood work. And they and I together developed an algorithm to estimate one's biological age using that. And according to that test, I'm in the top 2% of people of my age for youthfulness. I'm about 10 years younger based on that than my actual age, so I'm 43. There are other tests. There's DNA methylation tests. I launched a company recently called Telehealth, which is for testing epigenetic age, which is measuring your DNA chemical changes. And so there are a variety of ways. There's no one test to rule them all. I'd like to do those two kind of tests to give me an idea of how I'm doing. But most importantly, it's about looking at the changes and see how you're doing and trying to correct those errors or non-optimal numbers that can occur over time. And you want to adjust things. You want to be scientific about it. To me, it comes naturally. Of course, I'm a scientist. So you measure, change, measure again. That's the way to go about life, I think, and optimize your body. And often I'm asked, tell me what to do, professor. Just tell me what pill should I take. Now, there are some rough rules,
Right.
but really everybody's different. Everyone has a different genetics, different background, different lifestyle, different history, different parents, different environment. And so you need to monitor yourself. But I agree, it's not easy to do what Brian does. There's no way everyone can afford it, let alone spend as much time on it. But for very little money, investment like giving up a cup of coffee or the money that it would take to have a year's worth of those coffees, you can spend that on your own health and you'll reap much greater rewards than you would get from drinking a cup of coffee. And if you can afford it, do both.
Yep. Now, I read your book, Lifespan. I took extensive notes and actually changed a lot of my own behavior and would love to dive into a couple things. One of the things that you got into in the book was this kind of idea of hot cold. And I had a little trouble just following the science of that, even though I now do it because it's fun. Why is this kind of hot cold combination good?
Yeah. So the big breakthrough, well, one of the big breakthroughs in the field that I was fortunate to be part of in the 1990s was the discovery of longevity genes. And they exist in all life forms except viruses. And viruses hijack them to infect us. So that's, still important there. But yeah, these longevity genes exist in yeast and plants. That's also important. Plants that we eat have longevity activating molecules. But really, the point is that these longevity genes we discovered in the early 2000s respond to biological adversity. Sometimes we call it stress, but I don't think stress is the right word because it invokes psychological stress, which is not what we're talking about. We're talking about cells and tissues and organs sensing that the food supply or the environment or having to run away from a saber-toothed tiger or an invading army is dangerous. And without danger, our bodies are complacent. We don't like to waste energy, so we put our energy into building fat and at the expense of getting older and staying young. So that the problem really is that our society is built to make us feel comfortable and take away any perceived threats to our survival. We don't have to go hungry, most of us. We don't have to run if we don't want to. Even our suitcases have wheels on them. We go up elevators, and our body says, perfect, great. I don't need to put energy into activating longevity genes. And they don't. And what we end up with is early aging, rapid aging, diabetes, heart disease as a result of the lifestyle that we have, which is an abundance rather than an adversity mimetic, as I like to call it. And so hot and cold, those are similar as exercise and fasting are, that they invoke this defense response adversity mimetics. And so you can do
So it's really about
sauna.
just it's about the stress,
Yeah, it
and
is.
it's a very and doing hot and cold or doing like interval trainings or doing some sort of fasting type of thing. It's a very low risk way of stressing your body.
Right. Well, you can always overdo it. If you stay in a sauna all day, you're probably not going to reap the
Yep.
benefits, or if you freeze your body parts. Same with exercise, you can overdo it. And fasting, of course, if you don't eat for a month, it's probably not going to be good either. So, you can always go too far. But the
Yep.
concept is called hormesis, which is what really doesn't kill you, makes you live longer. And that's what I recommend people live by, is that don't listen to the marketing from companies that want you to eat as much as possible and snack between meals. Listen to your body, listen to me, hopefully, and others like me, like Nir Barzilai, my good friend, who say that you want to put your body in a state where it feels like it's working or feels like it needs something. And food and exercise and hot and cold are the best examples of that.
On the interval training side, is obviously the stress is probably a really good thing. What is the other big reasons for this kind of like interval workouts and why they're better?
Yeah, well, it's the shock to the system. Most of what we've learned is that you can eat as much as you want during one meal, but then you taper it off during the day.
Yep.
Same with exercise. You can sit around, but then you want to put your body into a hypoxic state where you're panting and cannot carry out a conversation, and it's mixing it up. It's the contrast between relaxation and the hormesis, the adversity. It's not so much the constant adversity, which we know constant adversity is not as good as mixing it up. Athletes know this. People who train their brain know this, and it's so that's the good news, is you don't always have to be running on a treadmill slowly or walking to get the benefits. You can just push yourself hard for 15 minutes 3 times a week and get really great benefits. Same with heat, same with cold. Do it, shock the body, get out, and do something else.
Yeah. 1 minute cold shower or whatever. Just something crazy.
Yeah, I will freely admit that I'm pretty lazy. I try to be a role model as best I can, but I often snack because I'm stressed. I often don't exercise. In fact, I rarely exercise like I should. But I do know the science, and I do think that doing a little bit goes a long way.
One thing on the diet side, you advised cured meats like cold cuts and bacon. Like why is that?
Oh, well, there's a lot of science about nitrogenous compounds. So those nitrates are damaging to DNA. And there are two problems with damaging your DNA. One is that it'll cause mutations to your genome, which is the digital information in the body.
And that's a
Uh,
cancer type of thing.
Cancer is the main readout of that. We used to think it was also aging, but actually, there's more and more research saying that it's the other type of information in the body that's more important for aging, which is the epigenome, the regulators of the genes. And that's what we are manipulating in my lab to control the aging process forward and backwards. And so when you eat nitrogenous compounds, what you're doing is breaking chromosomes. And that we've shown leads to aging because the body has to react to fix that DNA. And in doing so, it eventually loses the ability to regulate the DNA itself.
Okay, got it. Now you're a big fan of NMN. And before I read your book, I had never even heard of NMN. Why is that good?
Well, now we're talking about research from my lab in the early 2000s. We found that the sirtuin longevity genes that my team, and well, I should say my mentor's team, Lenny Guarenti, discovered sirtuins. So let me tell you about sirtuins. These are 7 genes in our body. Some of us have better versions than others. And in general, it's found that they protect the body against diseases ranging from Alzheimer's to diabetes. Now, these genes get switched off over time. Their main role is to make enzymes that tell the body how to survive during adversity. So when you're exercising and dieting and in sauna, they come on, protect the body. But the problem is, as we get older, they become less active. And one of the biggest problems is that for their activity, they require a little molecule in the body, a very abundant one called NAD. NAD is required for life. It's involved in chemical reactions, but it's also used as a sensor for the body of adversity. When we have no adversity, we're eating a lot and sitting around, NAD levels go down. That's true as we get older as well. So a 50-year-old has half the levels of a 20-year-old for NAD. And what we like to do is to boost the levels of NAD back up to youthful levels and mimic exercise, mimic dieting, or even enhance those modalities. Now, we've even got human clinical trial data. I was mentioning one of my companies has done clinical trials already for the last few years. And by raising NAD levels, we can actually improve human health. And we hope that this will be a drug one day to treat diseases ranging from kidney failure to even COVID-19 survival. So what about NMN? Well, NMN is a precursor that the body uses to make NAD. And by ingesting NMN, we've shown in humans that you can raise your NAD levels by about 2 to 3-fold. And that's beneficial in humans based on clinical studies. When I say I'm a fan, I'm not selling this stuff. A lot of companies claim that I'm involved with selling it. That's not true. I spend a fair amount of legal fees on trying to stop that. But yeah, any NAD boosters, as they're called, seem to be really beneficial. I take NMN, and I've been doing so for probably about 8 to 10 years. And so far, so good. I've only seen benefits. Some people ask about
And so,
the
so
risk.
basically, you're saying the goal is to increase your NAD. One way to do that is through exercise. You can do that by fasting, sauna. But there's this other way to do it is to take this NMN. Essentially, it's a supplement, and that can also boost your NAD.
Yes, that's what the science is saying, and others have shown it improves 6-minute walk. So it's being used for performance, endurance, and overall health. It's not proven that it extends lifespan. In fact, we've only just recently found it extends a mouse's lifespan. I haven't published that yet. So it's early days. We still have a lot to go on, or to do at least.
Are
But
there side effects for taking it, or does doing one thing make it harder to do something else? Or
it doesn't seem to be. I mean, in mice, there's a couple of studies in some rare cases of genetically inbred mice that don't have an immune system, there's hints that cancer might spread slightly more frequently in a very small study. But these are mice that are inbred and have no immune system. So it's still full steam ahead with human clinical trials. There's been no adverse events in any of the patients that have been tested, or the subjects, I should call them. And yeah, so I'm not yet ready to say that there's any known, or at least tangible, provable risks that I want to be the first person to know if there's a risk, because my
yeah,
father takes it, my friends and family take it, I take it. So I'm not selling it. I just want to know the science. But I do know that my father is too old to wait till 100% proof that this extends lifespan. You and I are getting to that point where we can't wait. And so that's really what I'm doing, is I'm educating the public about the risks and rewards. There are a couple of mouse studies that I want to point out, but all weighed up, I think that the risk right now for me and my family it's worth taking that risk until further notice.
now you also take metformin, um, and and like I don't even know how to pronounce it, but
Barzillai.
resveratrol. Sorry,
Oh, it was virtual.
resveratrol. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and and often I'll when I talk to my doctor, he's like, well, I feel like, maybe you're a bit too young to take metformin. And maybe, I often encourage my patients who are, let's say, 60 or over, but it has some side effects and that it makes it a little bit less likely to build muscle mass and stuff like that. Like, how do you weigh some of those things?
Well, let's start with when should you start? I had a real heart to heart with my doctor when I was 29. I had super high cholesterol levels. And he said, I don't want to put you on a medicine because you're too young. And I said, dude, it, I don't want to wait till I get heart disease to go on a medicine. Put it on me, put me on it now. So I've always been of the philosophy that it doesn't matter what age somebody is, you treat everybody the same way, within reason. Of course, 20-year-olds are a bit young for this kind of stuff. But if you're in your 30s and you want to prevent heart disease, prevent diabetes, I think that it's perfectly fine under doctor's supervision taking medicines that will prevent disease, especially when these medicines are extremely safe. You do it under doctor's supervision in case there's a problem. But with metformin, for example, and certainly resveratrol, very, very, very rare that somebody gets so sick that it's a problem. And it's always reversible as well. You just stop taking it if you get sick. So these are risks I think are worth taking. I don't prescribe anything. I don't even recommend anything publicly. So I would say, talk to your doctor. If they say you're too young, I would keep fighting it. I would show them the data. And if you want, there's always alternative doctors. I think that the argument that when you're young, it's too early. I
Well,
would
there's
say
a
to the
there's a,
doctor,
at least
where's
what
the
I had
data?
heard, that there's this trade-off of like, okay, it's hard to build muscle mass. Building muscle mass is very important as you get older. Um, and so so you have to figure the trade.
Well, it's frustrating to me as a scientist that when somebody says something in public or a podcaster says it's a problem, it becomes locked into the public's consciousness. And unfortunately, nobody ever goes back and reads the actual paper that this came from. And that was also true for the Women's Health Initiative and breast cancer. People still believe that HRT causes breast cancer, and that turns out it doesn't. Same for metformin and exercise. When you look at the data, uh, and it's really easy to see, it's not difficult, you can look at it. The graph that says there's a difference, first of all, is being manipulated in a way that is deceiving. They cut off the y-axis so that you're just seeing the very tippy top of the bars. And the actual difference is about 5%. And it turns out that 5% is almost certainly due to people just not doing the extra couple of reps in the exercise because they feel a bit more tired. So what's the solution? Well, if you don't mind having muscles that are 5% smaller, then no big deal. Those muscles are
Yeah.
just as strong and healthier, and have less inflammation. I don't care if my muscles are still 95% there. I'm not trying to win any contests for bodybuilding. But I can avoid metformin on days I work out, no big deal, or force myself to do a couple more reps when I feel tired. That's all it is. I wouldn't say that that's a reason not to take metformin. There are other reasons, such as gastrointestinal issues. That's more of an issue. But I think the point here that I want to make is make sure that the science is true and the data that you're getting is true. Don't just believe pundits or even doctors who are saying this stuff. Try to go to the paper, read it, or listen to scientists who do read papers. And also just measure yourself. Do it under doctor supervision. Make sure that it's not harming you. Make sure you feel fine. And then, by all means, in my view, it's worth starting in your 40s to maximize your lifespan because we're aging every day. It doesn't just begin after the age of 50 or 60.
Now, initially, I was actually kind of skeptical of the idea that like big subsets of the population would adopt any of these anti-aging lifestyles. But then I saw a couple of studies that say 10% of Americans are already intermittent fasting every single day. Over 25% have already tried it. Maybe intermittent fasting is not the best one to measure because it's kind of easy to do. You just kind of skip breakfast, and so it's kind of a relatively simple thing to do. But how optimistic that you actually will see widespread behavior changes?
Well, we are in the midst of a revolution in people's wellness and how active they are in their own health. The pandemic was a major wake up call to people who stared in the mirror and saw their own mortality And then there was a boom in home testing because people didn't want to go into doctors' offices for obvious reasons. And so it's becoming also easier for people to take home tests. Now, we don't want people, going rogue and testing themselves and trying to interpret themselves with ChatGPT 4 and beyond. I don't think that's the only solution. I think there's a risk that we won't have enough doctors' supervision and that some people overdo it.
Yeah.
There's always that risk. So there's a caution here. I do think, though, that there's a place for people taking their own health into their own hands. You can't always be supervised by your doctor when you're at a restaurant. People do need to realize that most of what affects their health in the future is up to them, not their doctor. And what you do every day in your life echoes for decades. And that changing your lifestyle is as important, if not more important, than the medicines you will take. And that's why I think that this revolution that we're seeing in the population, not just in the US, but around the world, is a great thing and will only become more prevalent. And in 20 years, it'll be the majority of people will be on board with monitoring their own health. It's going to get easier and easier with devices as well, cheaper and cheaper. And we'll look back at 2 years ago when almost nobody did this and think that going to your doctor once a year for an annual checkup and having the doctor bang on your knees and cough will seem medieval. In fact, even to us today, it seems medieval.
Yeah, it's in the intermittent fasting one. While it's maybe 10% of the population. It seems like it's probably closer to 40% of my friends.
Oh yeah.
And I think one of the reasons is, well, besides the fact that it's relatively easy to do. It's maybe one of the easiest ones to do of all the things that people prescribe. It's also pretty easy to at least for people to believe that has low harm. And because if you say to somebody, stop eating meat or something like that, first of all, I think that's hard for people to do because they might love their meat. And second, they may show you 40 studies of how that actually could do harm to them. So it's kind of like there's both things that come in of why people may change behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody's different. Some people like hot and cold therapy. Some people don't.
Yep.
Exercise is for some. It's not for me, although I know it's important to do.